was a one of a kind. He was a very beautiful person, and I miss you a lot.
The terrible tragedy of marvelous Marvin Hagler is more than just heartbreaking. It shook the sports world to its core.
He was so mentally strong, he had an iron chin, and his discipline was impeccable.
Even Joe Rogan got emotional on his podcast talking about what happened to the boxing legend. Fans everywhere were devastated. This wasn't just a loss. It was a moment that exposed the painful truth behind one of boxing's greatest icons. From the gritty streets of Newark to the bright lights of Las Vegas, Hagler's rise inspired millions. But behind the glory was a battle few ever saw, one that ended in a way no champion deserves. This is the heartbreaking truth behind the tragedy, and it will leave you stunned. The making of a champion. Born on May 23, 1954, in Newark, New Jersey, young Marvin Hagler grew up in a world where survival meant being tough. His family lived in a poor neighborhood where the streets were often dangerous, and money was always tight. When Marvin was just 12 years old, his family moved to Brockton, Massachusetts, looking for a fresh start after the terrible Newark riots of 1967. Little did anyone know that this move would change boxing history forever. In Brockton, Marvin found something that would save his life, a boxing gym run by two brothers named Goody and Pat Petronelli. The Petronelli brothers saw something special in young Marvin right away. They watched him train with a fire in his eyes that they had never seen before. "If they cut my bald head open, they will find one big boxing glove," Hagler once said. "That's all I am. I live it." This wasn't just talk. Marvin lived and breathed boxing like no one else. It was that same obsession, that relentless drive, that would one day make his tragic fall feel all the more heartbreaking. But success didn't come easy. Marvin's amateur career started with a bunch of losses that could have broken anyone's spirit. However, each defeat only made him stronger and more determined. The Petronelli brothers taught him that boxing wasn't just about throwing punches. It was about heart, will, and never giving up. These early struggles only make the tragedy that followed hit harder, because they showed just how much he overcame to become marvelous. What made Marvin different from other fighters wasn't just his skill, it was his complete dedication to the sport. While other kids were playing video games or hanging out, Marvin was in the gym for hours every day. He developed a southpaw stance that confused opponents and a granite chin that seemed impossible to crack. But more than anything, he developed an unbreakable will to prove himself. And that's what makes the terrible tragedy of Marvin Hagler so utterly heartbreaking. Because this was a man who fought for everything, and still couldn't control how it ended. The long road to recognition. Marvin Hagler's journey to the top was filled with frustration that would have crushed most fighters. When he turned professional in 1973, beating Terry Ryan in the second round, many people thought this was just another young fighter who would fade away. They had no idea they were watching the beginning of a legend whose rise would be overshadowed by how cruelly the sport treated him in the end. The terrible thing about Marvin's early career wasn't losing, it was being ignored. Many top fighters and promoters saw him as a high-risk, low-reward opponent. They knew he was dangerous, but they also knew he wasn't famous enough to make them big money. So they avoided him like the plague. That pain, the pain of being denied his shot, was the first crack in a heartbreaking journey that would haunt him long after retirement. This rejection hurt Marvin deeply, but it also fueled his fire. He was willing to fight anyone, anywhere, anytime. "I'll fight anybody," he would say. "I don't care where or when." This attitude led to years of battles against tough opponents in small venues, building his skills and reputation. But even as his fists earned him fans, the politics of boxing kept trying to deny him the respect he so clearly deserved, adding to the tragedy of a man who had to fight the system just as hard as his opponents. The boxing world started to take notice when Marvin faced Vito Antuofermo on November 30th, 1979, for the WBA and WBC middleweight titles. Many fans and experts thought Marvin clearly won the fight, but the judges called it a draw. The heartbreaking decision left Marvin without the title he deserved, but it also proved he belonged with the best fighters in the world. That one moment, that one decision, captured the bitterness of his story. How even when he gave everything, boxing didn't always give back. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, Marvin used this setback as motivation. He knew that to get respect, he would have to take it by force. Less than a year later, he traveled to London to face Alan Minter for the same titles. On September 27, 1980, Marvin destroyed Minter in 3 rounds, finally becoming the undisputed middleweight champion of the world. The victory over Minter was more than just winning a title. It was Marvin proving that all those years of being overlooked and disrespected were over. He had climbed to the top of the boxing mountain, and he wasn't planning to come down anytime soon. And yet, knowing what came later, this triumph feels even more heartbreaking. Because the terrible tragedy of Marvin Hagler is that even after he reached the summit, peace never fully came. The Warrior's reign. Once Marvin Hagler became champion, he transformed into something truly special. For the next 7 years, he defended his middleweight titles with a ferocity that scared other fighters. His first defense came against Fulgencio Obel Mejias in January 1981, which he won by technical knockout. This was just the beginning of a reign of terror that would make boxing history. What made Marvin's championship run so incredible wasn't just that he kept winning, it was how he won. He was unmistakable in the ring, with his bald head shining under the lights, and his southpaw stance confusing opponents. He was relentless and vicious, stopping his opponent with his devastating power. Marvin fought with what people called a chip on his shoulder. He was convinced that boxing fans and promoters still didn't give him the respect he deserved. This feeling of being underappreciated drove him to fight harder than anyone else. The constant slights and dismissals from the boxing establishment fueled an inner fire that burned brighter with each perceived injustice. Every time he was overlooked for a major fight or snubbed by promoters, it only made him more determined to prove his worth through sheer dominance in the ring. It's that emotional toll, layered beneath the knockouts and title belts, that made his story not just remarkable, but truly heartbreaking. He was so upset about not being introduced by his nickname Marvelous before a 1982 fight that he went to court and legally changed his name to Marvelous Marvin Hagler. This unprecedented move showed just how deeply the lack of recognition affected him and his willingness to take control of his own narrative. It was a bold act, but also a quiet cry for validation. The same man who crushed opponents with ease still had to fight to be seen. His promoter, Bob Arum, later said, "He was certainly one of the greatest middleweights ever, and one of the greatest people that I've ever been around and promoted. He was a real man, loyal, and just a fantastic person." But fans didn't just see Marvin as a great person, they saw him as a destroyer in the ring. During his championship reign, Marvin defended his titles 12 times, usually winning in spectacular fashion. He defeated top contenders like Juan Domingo Roldan and Mustafa Hamsho, each victory adding to his growing legend. Every fight showed different aspects of his incredible skill set, from his explosive punching power to his ability to outsmart opponents. The boxing world was starting to realize they were watching something special. Marvin wasn't just another champion. He was a warrior who brought everything he had to every fight. But what makes this part of his life so tragic in hindsight is that even at his peak, Marvin was still battling invisibility. The heartbreak wasn't just in how his career ended, but in how hard he had to fight, even when he was on top. His greatest battles were still ahead of him, and they weren't fought in the ring. The Four Kings era. The 1980s brought together 4 middleweights who would create the most exciting era in boxing history. Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, and Roberto Duran became known as the Four Kings. Their battles against each other would become the stuff of legends. What made this era so special was that all 4 fighters actually fought each other. In today's boxing world, top fighters often avoid each other to protect their undefeated records. But the Four Kings weren't afraid to risk it all. They craved greatness, not comfort. They weren't just boxing for belts, they were fighting for legacy. Each fighter brought something different to the table. Sugar Ray Leonard had charm and speed that made him a star from day one. Thomas Hearns was a knockout artist from Detroit with a devastating right hand. Roberto Duran was a street fighter from Panama who never backed down from anyone. And then there was Marvin, the underdog, the outsider, the man whose heartbreaking climb to glory was anything but smooth. While Leonard and Hearns became stars almost immediately, Marvin had to prove himself the hard way. He fought in tough gyms against dangerous opponents, earning his reputation through blood and sweat. This made him feel bitter because the other boxers got more attention and bigger paychecks without putting in as much effort. Fans and promoters still overlooked him. He wasn't just fighting opponents, he was fighting to be seen. This double standard stung deeply. The other kings basked in media attention and multi-million-dollar contracts. Marvin, despite his dominance, often stood in their shadow. That imbalance wasn't just unfair, it was painful. For a man who gave everything to the sport, the lack of recognition was part of the tragedy. But Marvin's frustration only made him tougher and more dangerous. He knew he had to be better than everyone else just to get the respect he deserved. As boxing expert Larry Merchant said, for all his greatness, he was a sensitive, gracious man outside the ring. But once the fight started, he became a force of destruction. It was as if every punch he threw carried the weight of all the slights and disrespect he'd endured. The Four Kings era produced some of the greatest fights ever seen, with each boxer bringing out the best in the others. But for Marvin, these fights were more than just winning. They proved that he belonged at the top of the sport. They were his answer to a world that had long refused to believe in him. And that, perhaps, is what makes his story so utterly heartbreaking. The War. April 15th, 1985, was the night that changed everything for marvelous Marvin Hagler. At Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, he faced Thomas "Hitman" Hearns in what would become known simply as the War. This wasn't just a fight. It was 8 minutes of pure violence that many people still call the greatest boxing match ever. Before the fight, tensions were already high. Marvin and Hearns had gone on a 23-city promotional tour that turned mutual respect into genuine dislike. Marvin wore a baseball cap with the word "War" on it, and he meant every letter. This wasn't hype. This was personal. When the opening bell rang, both fighters charged like bulls. Hearns hit Marvin with his best shot, a thunderous right hand that would have knocked out most fighters. But Marvin just walked through it like it was nothing. Hearns hit him with a really good right hand with as much as he had, and Hagler walked through it. Analyst Al Bernstein remembered. I knew that fight was going to be over soon after that. But then came the nightmare Marvin had feared his entire career. Hearns opened up a terrible cut above Marvin's right eye. Blood poured down his face. The referee stopped the action to check the cut, and for a moment, it looked like the fight might be stopped. This was exactly what Marvin had been afraid of his whole career, losing not because he was beaten, but because of a technicality. When they stopped the fight to look at the cut, I realized they might be playing games, and I wasn't going to let them take the title away, Marvin said later. It was a scary feeling. I thought, why are they stopping this fight? I didn't realize I was bleeding. It wasn't in my eyes. Then I knew I had to destroy this guy. And that's exactly what he did. Despite the blood streaming down his face, Marvin came out for the third round like a man possessed. He unleashed a barrage of punches that crumpled Hearns to the canvas. The fight was over, and Marvin had proven once and for all that he was truly marvelous. He had written his name in boxing history with blood, grit, and heartbreak. Promoter Bob Arum said Marvin simply willed himself to victory. That was an unbelievable fight, Arum said. Probably the greatest fight ever. Even Hearns admitted years later, I can't take anything away from him. His awkwardness messed me up. He fought his heart out, and we put on a great show for all time. It should have been Marvin's ultimate vindication, but as you'll soon see, even after this legendary triumph, the tragedy still wasn't over. The hands of stone. After the war with Hearns, Marvin Hagler had already proven he was special, but his next challenge would test him in a completely different way. On November 10th, 1983, he faced Roberto Duran, known as Manos de Piedra, Hands of Stone, at Caesar's Palace. This wasn't going to be a quick, explosive fight like the Hearns battle. This was going to be a long, grueling test of discipline, heart, and survival. Duran was unlike any opponent Marvin had faced before. The Panamanian fighter was a master boxer with incredible defensive skills and the heart of a warrior. He had been fighting professionally since he was a teenager and had defeated some of the best fighters in the world. More importantly, Duran never gave up, no matter how much punishment he took. The fight with Duran became a chess match. For 15 rounds, both fighters used every trick they knew. Duran frustrated Marvin with his slick movement and defensive skills, while Marvin kept pressing forward with his relentless pressure. It was a battle of styles that kept fans on the edge of their seats. What made this fight so important wasn't just the skill level, it was what it proved about Marvin's character. Duran was the first opponent to take him the full 15 rounds in a title defense. Many fighters would have gotten frustrated and made mistakes, but Marvin stayed patient and didn't crack. He adapted. As the rounds went by, Marvin's superior conditioning began to show. His years of intense training in the gym paid off as he got stronger while Duran started to slow down. In the later rounds, Marvin took control of the fight, landing harder and more frequent punches. His will was unshakable. When the final bell rang, Marvin had won a unanimous decision. But more than just winning, he had shown that he could adapt to any style of opponent. The victory over Duran proved that Marvin wasn't just a devastating puncher, he was a complete fighter who could win in any kind of battle. He was extremely vulnerable in that fight multiple times, and he got through it, analyst Al Bernstein said. To me, that's the true measure of Hagler. The fight with Duran showed that Marvin had the heart to match his incredible skill. But this incredible performance, like so many others, was often overlooked in the larger media conversation. In an era where flash often outweighed grit, Marvin's quiet brilliance didn't always get the spotlight. And that too became part of the tragedy, that even at the height of his greatness, Marvin Hagler never got the full credit he so clearly earned. The controversial ending. After years of dominating the middleweight division, Marvin Hagler faced his biggest challenge on April 6, 1987. Sugar Ray Leonard, the golden boy of boxing, came out of retirement to challenge Marvin for his titles. This wasn't just a fight. It was a spectacle. And for Marvin, it would become the moment that marked the beginning of the end. Leonard had been away from boxing for 3 years due to a detached retina, but he was still one of the most famous athletes in the world. He was charming, handsome, and beloved by fans and media alike. In contrast, Marvin was seen as the blue-collar fighter who had fought tooth and nail for every ounce of respect. And now, it was all on the line. The fight itself was a masterpiece of boxing strategy. Leonard knew he couldn't stand and trade punches with Marvin, so he used his speed and movement to stay out of trouble. He would dart in, land quick combinations, and then dance away before Marvin could respond. Meanwhile, Marvin stalked Leonard around the ring, trying to land his powerful shots. For 12 rounds, the contrast was clear. Leonard was playing to the crowd and the judges. Marvin was fighting to win. Many observers believed Hagler had done enough. He controlled the ring, landed the more damaging blows, and dictated the tempo. When the final bell rang, most people expected Marvin to retain his titles. He had been the aggressor throughout the fight and seemed to land the more meaningful punches. Even Leonard seemed unsure. But then the announcement came. A split decision for Sugar Ray Leonard. In an instant, years of hard work and sacrifice were undone. The crowd erupted in shock. Commentators were stunned. Headlines the next day called it highway robbery. Marvin Hagler, the man who had fought everyone and feared no one, had been outpointed not in the ring, but on the scorecards. I went over to Marvin and said Ray is talking about a rematch, promoter Bob Arum remembered. He glared at me as only Marvin could and said, "Tell Ray to get a life." The hurt ran too deep. The loss wasn't just on paper, it was personal. A final insult to a career built on being overlooked. And with that, at just 32 years old, Marvin Hagler walked away from boxing forever. It wasn't age, it wasn't injury, it was heartbreak. He had devoted his life to the sport, only to see it taken from him in what many still call one of the most controversial decisions in boxing history. And that's the terrible tragedy of Marvelous Marvin Hagler. He didn't lose his titles in the ring. He lost them to politics, favoritism, and the one thing he could never fight through: injustice. Life after boxing. When marvelous Marvin Hagler retired from boxing in 1987, he didn't just leave the ring, he left America entirely. Feeling betrayed by the sport he loved and the system he felt had stolen his final victory, Marvin moved to Italy to start a new chapter of his life. In Italy, Marvin found peace and purpose in a way he never had before. He learned to speak Italian fluently and embraced the culture with the same dedication he had shown to boxing. "I feel fortunate to get out of the ring with my faculties and my health," he said a year after retiring, showing that he understood how lucky he was to escape the sport without serious injury. Marvin also discovered a new passion: acting. He appeared in several Italian action movies, including Indio and Virtual Weapon. While his film career never reached the heights of his boxing success, Marvin enjoyed the challenge of learning something completely new. It showed that even after boxing, he was always willing to push himself in new directions. But Marvin never completely left boxing behind. He stayed connected to the sport as a mentor and ambassador, attending major fights and offering commentary. His insights were always respected because everyone knew he had seen it all and done it all in the ring. Young fighters would seek out Marvin's advice, and he was always willing to share his knowledge. He understood how important it was to give back to the sport that had given him so much. His mentoring helped develop the next generation of fighters, ensuring his influence would continue long after retirement. Marvin also became involved in charity work, particularly supporting causes related to youth development and sports. He used his fame and resources to make positive changes in communities, showing the same heart outside the ring he had shown inside it. Living in Italy gave Marvin the quiet life he had always wanted. Away from the spotlight and pressure of being a champion, he could enjoy simple pleasures like good food, beautiful scenery, and time with his family. It was a peaceful existence that seemed perfect for a warrior who had given everything to the sport. The heartbreaking end. On March 13th, 2021, the boxing world was stunned. Marvelous Marvin Hagler, the indestructible warrior, the icon, had suddenly passed away at his home in New Hampshire at age 66. The man who had gone toe-to-toe with legends, who had outlasted punishment in the ring for over a decade, was gone in an instant, and nobody saw it coming. His wife Kay made the heartbreaking announcement on social media. "Today, unfortunately, my beloved husband, Marvelous Marvin, passed away unexpectedly at his home here in New Hampshire," she wrote. "Our family requests that you respect our privacy during this difficult time." What made this tragedy even more heartbreaking was how sudden it was. Marvin seemed healthy and active, still appearing at boxing events and staying connected to the sport he loved. According to his family, he had suffered a heart attack, an ordinary end to an extraordinary life. Fellow boxers from the Four Kings era, Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, and Roberto Duran, all paid tribute to their former rival and friend. Leonard especially talked about Marvin as a man of tremendous character and a fierce opponent. Joe Rogan, a longtime boxing fan, was visibly emotional when discussing Marvin's death on his podcast. His raw emotion reflected what millions of fans felt: the loss of not just a great fighter, but a man who represented everything pure about boxing. This wasn't just sad, it was truly heartbreaking. Because after a lifetime of fighting for respect, Marvin had finally found peace, only to be taken far too soon. He had left boxing on his own terms, built a new life in Italy, and seemed content with his legacy. He had nothing left to prove. The terrible tragedy of Marvelous Marvin Hagler isn't just that he passed away, it's that he was finally happy, and just like that, he was gone. From the tough streets of Newark to the bright lights of Las Vegas, Marvin Hagler showed us what it means to never give up on your dreams. What do you think made Marvin Hagler so special as a fighter? And which of his legendary battles do you think was the most important for his legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments.